I'm gonna read a typical essay, Bores, written by Edward Vera Lucas. Bores. It requires a sense of superiority, assurance, and self confidence to write about bores at all, except as one of them. But since your true bore is always unconscious of his borishness, and indeed usually think of himself as the most companionable of men, to write as one of them is to acquit oneself of the stigma. Nonetheless, at some time, I fear everybody is a bore, because everybody now and again has a fixed idea to impart, and the fixed ideas of the few are the boredom of the many. Also, even the least self centered of men can now and then have a personal experience sufficiently odd to lose its true proportions and force him to influence it over much of the others. But bores as a rule are bores always, for egotism is beyond question the bore's foundation stone, his belief being that what interests him and involves himself as a self-centered must interest you. Since he lives all the time, and all the time something is happening in which he is the central figure, he has always something new to discuss upon himself, his house, his garden, himself, his wife, his children, himself, his car, his handicap, himself, his health, his ancestry, himself. The strange way in which, without inviting them to, all kinds of human confide in him and ask his advice, his humorous way with waiters, his immunity from influenza, his travels, the instinct which always led him to the best restaurants, his clothes, his dentist, his freedom from shibboleths, he being one of those men who look upon the open air as the best church, his possible ignorance of the arts, but certitude as to what he himself like, his triumphs over the income people. These are happy men, those walls axle trees. I have been referring to bores exclusively as men, whether that is quite just, I'm not sure, but I shall leave it there. Bores are happy largely because they have so much to tell and come so well out of it, but chiefly because they can find people to tell it to. The tragedy is they can always find their listeners, me almost first. And why can't they? Why can't even notorious bores always be sure of an audience? The answer is the ineradicable kindness of human nature. Few men are strong enough to say, "For heaven's sake, go away, you weary me." Bores make cowards of us all, and we are left either to listen or endure or to take refuge in craven flight. We see them in the distance and turn down side streets or hasten from the room. One man I know has come back with a peach boy whose duty is, whenever my friend is attacked by a certain bore in the club, to hasten up and say he's wanted in the telephone. An ingenious device, but it must not be worked too often. Cause my dear friend, although he can stoop to deceit and subterfuge, would not for anything let the bore think that he is avoiding him, would not bring grief to that complacent candid face. For it is one of the bore's greatest assets that he has simplicity and disarms. Astute, crafty men are seldom bores. Very busy men are seldom bores. Of all bores, the most repellent specimen is the one who comes close up, the buttonholing bore. This is the kind describing by a friend of mine with a vivid sense of phrase as the man who spreads bird lime all over you. A bore who keeps a reasonable way off can dealt with. But when they can lean on you, you are done. It is worse when they fix your eyes only a foot away and tell you a funny story that is not funny. Nothing is so humiliating as to have to counterfeit a loafer at the bidding of a bore, but we do it, the incurable weakness of benignity of human nature once again. Then there is the bore who begins a funny story, and although you tell him you have heard it, doesn't stop. What should be done with him? Another of the worst type of bore is the man who says, "Why should we be without our sense of humor?" He is even capable of saying, "Nothing but my unfailing sense of humor saved me." There is also the man who says, "Live and let live," as my poor dear father always used to say. There was once an eccentric peer, I forgot both his names and the place where I read about him, who had contracted, all unconsciously, the habit of thinking loud, and in this world of artifice, where society is cemented and sustained very largely by a compromise between what we think and what we see, His thoughts were very often at a variance with his words. One of the stories in the memoirs in which I found him describes how he met an acquaintance in St. James Street and, after muttering quite audibly to himself for a few minutes as they walked side by side, "Confound it! What a nuisance meeting this fellow! I have always disliked him, but now that we have met, I suppose I must ask him to dinner." He stopped and said with very appearance of cordiality, "You will dine with us this evening, won't you?" Well, as a sheet of armor plate against bores, I don't think we could do much better than cultivate the habit of thinking truthfully aloud, unless we no remedy against bores, except total evasion. No bore ever says, after no matter how many hints, "I will avoid that man in future. I know I bore him." So they will always flourish. But if a certain famous weekly humorous paper were to cease publication, distasteful and incredible thought, though it automatically be a decrease in the more topics, cause then no one could no longer repeat those things of his children which are good enough for Punch. Thank you.